Welcome. I'm Becky James. I'm the grower at Becky's Bounty. This is an urban garden set in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And I'm just going to walk you through the garden and tell you about the projects that I have going here. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the siting of the garden itself. As you look out over the garden, we're facing south, and there's a gentle slope to the south. So this makes for good southern exposure for year-round gardening, and it also makes it easier for watering the garden with my gravity-fed rainwater collected in the system. Originally this was a field full of very bad weeds and noxious invasive plants, and it took me a while to get cleared of all that, but now it's doing well as a garden. The first piece I'm going to show you is actually the newest addition to the project, and this is a greenhouse that my brother and I constructed this winter. The greenhouse, if you want to come in, houses the rainwater collection system. I can store 500 plus gallons of water that come off the roof, and then you see the white pipe, the overflow goes to the pond. I have a vent window and a door, but I also have a thermostatically controlled fan in the kitchen window, and this winter I was able to heat the apartment where I have my grow room, and I was able to start all of these tomato plants like the second week in February, and so now they are almost ready to go in the ground. I didn't start the plants in the greenhouse because it was actually too hot, but I am now hardening the plants off by raising the side to allow airflow in to keep the temperature right. So this pond was installed last year. I had a group come in from Asheville called Permaculture in Action, and the original plan was that they were going to do a long, narrow, shallow pond that would take the winter sun and bounce it up onto the house and help warm the house. But when we got into the project, we discovered that we were going to run into a sewer line, and so the design had to quickly change, and what we came up with was an 8-foot by 16-foot, 4-foot deep pond with a significant dam, much further from the house than we originally thought. Because we're now losing the winter sun bounce, that is actually why I built the greenhouse out to meet the pond. So now the winter sun bounces off the pond, heats the greenhouse, and heats the house. The other use for this pond will actually, of course, be a reservoir if I get into a drought situation, which I don't know when that might happen here in this rainforest. I have yet to get some nice plants around the pond to make some shade. There are some fish in the pond to help with mosquito control. I might get some small catfish, and might grow lotus flowers and other water plants that I can sell at the market. The pond overflows to the far side of the garden. There's a berm that we created, and the overflow from the pond goes out and fills little swales to water that berm, which has comfrey and elderberry on it. And next week I'm going to go pick up a bunch of wineberries and install them on that berm also. This is an idea I'm going to try this year with growing tomatoes. Last year we had a terrible time with tomato blight, early and late tomato blight in this region. People lost whole crops of tomatoes. I had tomatoes, but I had to spend about 3 hours a day on tomatoes for weeks to get even 25% of my crop to market. So I'm going to work with some blight-resistant varieties like Mountain Magic, and then there's a Tommy Toe that's supposedly very blight-resistant. But the other thing I'm going to do is try to prevent the splash up of soil that has the fungus in it on the tomato plants. So I'm going to cut the bottoms off of pots, invert them, fill them with soil, plant the tomato plants in those pots, and then mulch heavily with, this is hops from the local brewery. This is my compost system. I use a 3-pile system. When you're going to compost, you need to have a good 3 or 4 feet by 3 or 4 feet cube to get enough volume to get the heat buildup to break things down. I stuff bamboo in the pile to bring air into the pile so you don't have to flip it as often. So this is my newest pile, and this one is still working a little bit. And this is my dirt ready to go. And I actually use this for my potting soil. And I use this screening table to screen out things that I don't want in the soil. There's glass and bits of trash, and I'll just screen this out. And I might have to add a little bit of perlite to help with water retention, so it's not too clay-like. But this is what I've been using to grow all those tomato plants with. This is my early spring garden, and some of the things that I grew in this garden I actually overwintered. Some spinach, which I've already picked out, and some kale. You can start crops to grow through the winter in the early fall, as long as they get a good healthy start, and then you need to cover them with a row cover. This fabric is a spun fabric. This is actually a summer fabric. It's very thin, and it allows a lot of sunlight and rain in, and I'm using it right now because I have a lot of flea beetles and I have a lot of bug problems that I don't want to use chemicals for. So in the winter time I use this kind of fabric, but it's a much heavier fabric, and it's rated to 26 degrees. We got down to 2 degrees and even colder than that with a wind chill factor, and yet I had 3 crops that made it through this past winter with the heavier row cover. So this is my black soldier fly production. This is an old compost tumbler bin, and I've converted it for use to produce black soldier fly larvae. Black soldier fly is a fly that only exists for a brief amount of time in its adult state to reproduce, and the larvae that they produce are super eaters, so you can inoculate your system with kitchen waste and it'll be gone in a day. If you had 25 pounds of larvae, they could process 100 pounds of food waste in a day. And there's a lot of research going on about black soldier fly right now. Clemson University is developing a poultry feed to use the black soldier fly larvae, and they're extruding it with black oil sunflower seed to make a really high quality poultry feed. My hope is to develop something that I can take to market and sell to backyard poultry owners. And I can't find any larvae to show you right now, but it's in there in that stinky mess. This piece of plastic on the ground is sort of a rough attempt to solarize. I'm trying to kill a bunch of weeds under here. When you want to solarize a piece of ground, the best way to do this would be a cleaner piece of plastic. You would bury the edges, but you'd also have like a drip hose underneath it so you could keep it watered. And in about 6 weeks' time, you will effectively kill everything underneath there, even all the goodies in the soil. But if you're trying to really, really clear something to put down mulch, or you don't want anything growing there, solarizing is a good way to do that. This shed is going to house a cob oven, and I'll gutter this shed to fill this water barrel to feed this water feature, which will overflow to this little wetland. And I'll plant cattails or elderberry, I'm not sure, some kind of water-loving plant will go on that berm. And this pool here is deep enough that I can dip logs in it for my mushroom log inoculation, which will be underneath this shade tree here. So this is just a basic drainage ditch beside the road, but the runoff from my pond actually comes behind this berm, and there's little potholes dug at intervals to help retain the water to water this berm. These large fleshy plants, this is comfrey. It's a great medicinal plant. They'll make a nice border along this edge of the garden, and then at some point I can just chop the foliage and put it straight into the garden, and it's a great feeder for the garden. But if you do grow this stuff, you need to really be careful not to disturb it because it'll spread like wildfire. Well, thanks for visiting Becky's Bounty. Come by and see me, and we'll talk about plants and food.